Objection. The solemn tones of the pipe organ cut off, as if in a death rattle, and the St. James Cathedral in Chicago fell into a silence as still as water. My voice was astonishingly calm, yet it rang throughout the church. At the altar, my fiancé Jacob Foster, clad in a pure white Armani tuxedo, stared at me with an expression of disbelief. Beside him, my sister Olivia, serving as maid of honor, stood frozen, her face drained of all color. Yes, the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life had become the opening scene of the most perfect act of revenge. My name is Madison Brooks, and I am 34 years old. After years of relentless effort, I had secured my position as a senior architect at a renowned Chicago architectural firm. In this city where skyscrapers compete for dominance, I took pride in using light, steel, and glass to shape the dreams and aspirations of people. Engaged to Jacob Foster, a billionaire who made his fortune in real estate investment, I believed my life would be completed without a single flaw, like a perfectly designed building of my own making. However, hidden within that perfect blueprint was a fatal flaw, one strong enough to shake the very foundation. The first sign appeared when I was entrusted with my first major project at the architectural firm and decided to celebrate its success with a modest party alongside my fiancé, Jacob. It was a cultural complex on the Chicago waterfront, a project that represented the culmination of my career after winning it in a competitive bid. As colleagues and superiors praised my achievements, Olivia stationed herself beside Jacob, laughing in a high-pitched voice as if she were the star, not me. "Jacob, you really are amazing. My sister's success must be because she has such a wonderful man like you behind her, right?" The atmosphere froze instantly. My years of effort and talent were reduced to a single comment about my fiancé's wealth. Forcing a strained smile, I tried to correct her, saying, "Olivia, that's not it. I achieved this on my own," but Jacob stopped me with a casual "come on now" and gave Olivia a wink. "Olivia, it's nice that you're so honest. I'm happy I could support Madison too." In that moment, I should have noticed something was wrong in Jacob's attitude. Instead of defending my pride, he had sided with my sister's thoughtless remark. Yet I swallowed that small thorn, unwilling to cause a stir in front of my family. My success had somehow come to be treated as a shared family asset, and there was an unspoken expectation that they were entitled to enjoy its benefits. I kept a lid on my discomfort, telling myself it was just because we were family. I never imagined that such complacency and greed would become the knife that would one day pierce straight through the foundation of my life. On the night before our wedding, I was alone in our apartment, spending a quiet evening making final checks for the ceremony. Jacob was staying with his best man at a hotel downtown. From the living room window, I could see the glittering night view of Chicago spread out like a field of jewels. A few years earlier, I could never have imagined that I would one day look out on such a view from my own home. This peaceful moment was supposed to be a modest reward for the years of relentless effort I had poured into my career. I was finishing the final words of a letter I had prepared as a surprise for Jacob. "I am truly happy that I can build the structure called life with you upon the foundation of love." Perhaps it was a bit too sentimental, I thought to myself. It was just as I set down the pen that it happened. Around 11 o'clock at night, the silence was broken by the notification sound of Jacob's tablet, which had been left in the study. It was the latest model I had given him a few months earlier, with a digital photo frame function meant for sharing and displaying family photos. Never did I imagine that its screen would one day announce the collapse of our family. On the notification banner was a familiar name: Olivia. A sense of dread surged through me, my heart pounding in an ominous rhythm. Why was my sister messaging Jacob's private tablet at this hour? Had the two of them been that close without my knowing? No, that couldn't be possible. I shook my head, trying to push away my suspicions. Yet once planted, the seed of unease began to take root deep in my chest, growing rapidly. As if guided by some unseen force, I made my way to the study. On the glowing screen was a preview of the message. "Thanks for yesterday." Jacob's room was absolutely gorgeous. The moment I read that line, my thoughts froze. My fingers began to tremble, independent of my will. With shaking hands, I opened the messaging app. What appeared before me was a vile world between two people I thought I knew. Thanks for yesterday. Your room was absolutely gorgeous. Your arms are the safest place in the world. Way more glamorous than my sister's condo. Your sister doesn't know a thing. She's always busy with work and doesn't know how to enjoy life. You, on the other hand, are young and exciting. After the wedding, I'll buy you something even better. But that will be our little secret from her. Really? I'm so happy. I still can't believe my sister is actually marrying a rich man like you. This dress I bought with your card is amazing. I can't wait to be part of your life, even if I have to steal you to get there. I felt a wave of nausea. To escape a life of poverty, I had sacrificed so much of myself. For Olivia's tuition, I had denied myself countless things I wanted. She had no understanding that I had built this position and income entirely through my own sleepless efforts. In her eyes, I was nothing more than the lucky sister who snagged a wealthy man. And she had set out to take that wealth for herself by seducing my fiancé. The final blow came in the form of an attached photo. Olivia, wearing a bathrobe emblazoned with the logo of a luxury hotel I recognized, was kissing Jacob on the cheek with a radiant smile. Behind them, the bed was in clear disarray, bearing the undeniable traces of their time together. The timestamp showed it was taken just a few hours earlier. At the very moment I had been thinking about the vows I would speak tomorrow. My world collapsed with a deafening crack. The first stage was denial. This must be some kind of mistake. This was a cruel joke. It had to be a skillfully doctored image made to frame me. Olivia would never do something like this. Jacob could never be that kind of man. But the raw, intimate exchange of messages shattered that fragile hope without mercy. Next came anger, rising from the pit of my stomach like molten lava. The betrayal on the day I had sacrificed my internship flashed back to me, connecting into a single unbroken line. How much of my life I had designed with my own two hands. Losing both of our parents at an early age, all that remained was a much younger sister and a small amount of insurance money. Moving from one relative's house to another, I gritted my teeth and studied relentlessly. I knew that to succeed in the overwhelmingly male-dominated world of architecture, I would have to work 3 times harder than anyone else. In college, I cut my sleeping hours to win scholarships and juggled multiple part-time jobs. I even scrimped on the cost of materials for my design models, and while my friends enjoyed a glamorous campus life, I spent my days shuttling between the library and the drafting room. A portion of my already meager living expenses always went to my sister, Olivia. Madison, I don't have enough for the club trip this time. Madison, everyone else has one, so I really want this brand name bag. Every time I heard her sweet, coaxing voice on the phone, I couldn't say no. I didn't want her to experience the same kind of misery I had. That was my only thought. And is this the result of all the years I supported her? I will never forget that internship with a renowned architect. Around the time I was beginning to stand out at the firm, I had earned a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a paid internship at the private atelier of a famous architect. It was my passport to a dream, one that could elevate my career to a global level. For months, I worked tirelessly, saving every possible cent for travel and living expenses. But one night, just a week before my departure, Olivia called me in tears. Madison, I don't know what to do. I messed up a big university project, and if I don't fix it, I'll fail the class and have to repeat the year. They said I need to take a special remedial course or I might not graduate. On the other end of the line, she was frantic, choking on her words. Having worked my way through college myself, her plea saying her future was at stake hit me squarely in the heart. The cost of the remedial course is so high, there's no way I can afford it with my own money. Madison, please help me. I hesitated. This was my future on the line. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon my sister. Even my aunt called to berate me over the phone, saying, "Are you really going to think only about your career when your sister is in crisis?" You heartless girl. I withdrew every cent I had saved for the internship and sent it to Olivia as her remedial course fee. My dream collapsed with a shattering sound. A few weeks later, I learned the unthinkable truth from a mutual friend. The story about Olivia's delayed graduation had been a complete lie. In reality, she had only wanted money for a trip to Europe with her boyfriend and for luxury brand goods. The friend showed me a social media post of Olivia posing in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, beaming with a luxury handbag no doubt purchased with the money I had handed her. That day, a part of my heart died. Fortunately, my boss, who understood my situation, used his connections to secure me a spot in a similar internship the following year. So in the end, my career survived. Though I could never forgive my sister, I threatened to stop paying for her university tuition unless she repaid me, and eventually forced her to sell some of her past luxury handbags to return the money. That was why I never completely cut ties with her. But I had no idea that this fatal mistake would come back to strike me in an even greater tragedy. Olivia's sweet, coaxing voice from back then, Jacob's suspicious wink, my aunt's unreasonable words. All of it had been part of an elaborate farce, staged for this very moment. How dare they trample on my life to this extent? And then, strangely, a fleeting thought of bargaining crept into my mind. What if I pretended I had never seen this tablet? If I went through with the wedding tomorrow, unaware of anything, wouldn't this glittering life continue? No, wrong. That would not be peace. It would be a living hell, rotting away under the name of deception. The moment I pushed that thought away, true despair struck me the stage of depression. My life was over. My blueprint had been torn beyond any possibility of repair. I collapsed where I stood, feeling the cold of the wooden floor against my back as I stared up at the ceiling. Tears poured endlessly, sobs breaking from my throat. The man I loved and the sister I had protected, the two people I trusted most, had conspired together to betray me. How much time passed, I couldn't tell. An hour, maybe two. My tears dried up, and my heart became an empty void. Then, suddenly, words from my university mentor drifted into my mind as if from within a fog. Madison, a good architect's true worth is tested when problems arise. If the foundation is shaken, don't lament, emotionally redo the structural calculations. Find where the flaw was, figure out how to reinforce it, or decide whether to dismantle it entirely and rebuild from bare ground. Those words rebooted my mind. Yes, this was not an emotional matter. A fatal structural defect had been found in the building called my life. The part I believed to be the foundation was rotting away. In that case, there was no such thing as surrendering and crying myself to sleep. This was acceptance. I would accept this reality. And then I would strike back. I would dismantle this defective structure in the most effective, most elegant, and most merciless way possible. With my own hands, I would create a flawless structure, a masterpiece bearing the name of ultimate revenge. I am an architect. This would be the greatest project of my life. As if a weight had been lifted from me, I rose swiftly to my feet. Not a single tear remained. My mind was clearer and colder than it had ever been. First, I calmly secured the evidence. I photographed the tablet screen with my smartphone messages, photos, timestamps, and backed up every single file to multiple cloud storages. I even uploaded the data to secure overseas servers with high anonymity, layering protective measures to ensure it could never be erased by any means. Then, I carried out my first act of sanction. I logged into my online banking account and terminated an automatic transfer. Olivia's private university tuition, $3,000 a month. I cut it off immediately. She had been giddy over her job offer from a major consulting firm, but without her graduation, that offer would turn into nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. I had quietly severed the very lifeline of the luxurious life she dreamed of. After halting the tuition payments, I moved on to the second stage of my plan, without sleeping a single minute until dawn. This was not a petty act of emotional revenge. It was a meticulous demolition project, one into which I would pour every skill and every ounce of knowledge I possessed as an architect. First, I built a simple web page in just a few hours. The background was jet black. In stark white Gothic typeface, I laid out the entire sequence of those messages and the damning photos in chronological order in a way that anyone could understand at a glance. For each piece of evidence, I added calm, precise commentary, as if annotating an architectural blueprint. August 12th, 11:28 p.m. While the bride, Madison, was making final preparations for the wedding, these messages were exchanged between the bride's sister, Olivia, and the groom, Jacob. Attached image, based on the timestamp, confirms both were in the same hotel room that night. EXIF data, location information preserved. I anticipated every possible counterargument and fortified the page with airtight logic to crush them completely. Not an emotional tirade, but a cold, unyielding presentation of facts. That was the core of this project. Next, I generated a QR code linking to the webpage. The final touch was designing the card on which the QR code would be printed. I created artwork closely resembling our wedding invitations, adorned with an elegant gold tone and the words, "A special journey of love for our treasured guests. Scan to view." From any angle, it would look like nothing more than a charming surprise from a blissfully happy couple. This Trojan horse I carried to the hotel's business center, where I used their premium card stock and high-quality color printer to produce 200 copies. By the time everything was ready, the eastern sky was beginning to pale. I showered and slipped into my pure white wedding dress. The woman reflected in the mirror looked like a stranger. But in the depths of her eyes burned not raging fury, nor frozen grief, only the cold, steel glint of unwavering resolve. And so began the day of destiny. St. James Cathedral. The solemn tones of the pipe organ filled the air, while light streaming through the stained glass cast beautiful patterns across the marble floor. Under the gaze of blessings, I walked down the aisle on my uncle's arm. The same uncle husband to the aunt who had scolded me for wanting to take that internship and who had turned a blind eye to my struggles. To take his arm now was a humiliation that made my blood boil. But this, too, was part of the final act in my flawless revenge play. I transformed even that insult into fuel for my cold resolve. I had no male relatives left whom I could truly trust. At the altar, Jacob gazed at me with a look of dreamy admiration and whispered, "You are the most beautiful woman in the world." Hearing those words, layered over the memory of last night's messages, made me feel sick. But I played the role of the perfect bride without flaw. Beside me, my maid of honor, Olivia, played the part of the proud little sister watching her happy bride of a sister. The pale pink dress she wore was, of course, a gift from me. Yet in her eyes, I could clearly see the gleam of desire for the $40 million fortune she believed she would soon have. The ceremony itself had been entrusted to my trusted wedding planner, Sophia. I had told her only at a certain point during the ceremony I want to share a surprise piece of digital content with the guests. At my signal, she and the staff quietly began handing each guest one of the cards with the QR code. Along with the hushed words, "A surprise from the bride." At first, it was just a small ripple. A few curious younger guests pulled out their smartphones and scanned the QR code immediately. And then their expressions froze in an instant. In the front row sat Jacob's parents. His father, a man well known in Chicago's social circles, wore a proud smile until the moment he glanced at the screen his wife showed him. In an instant, his face was completely drained of color. His wife let out a soundless cry, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth as her whole body began to tremble. An elderly gentleman, the largest shareholder in Jacob's company, looked at the screen once, then twice, then a third time before nudging Jacob's business partner with his elbow. "Hey, look, something's gone terribly wrong," he whispered, his voice somehow carrying unnaturally clearly through the stillness of the church. The business partner leaned in to see the screen, a slow, amused smirk curling at the corner of his lips, and immediately began tapping out a message on his own phone. Most likely a mass text to the other executives. Seated midway down the aisle, my former university mentor froze as he read the screen, then turned to me with sad eyes. After a long moment, he nodded slowly and firmly, as if to say, "That's right, Madison. I support your decision." Toward the back, Olivia's university friends glanced at the screen, then at each other, before turning their eyes away from her as though she were something vile. Wow, that's disgusting. Seriously, that's unbelievable. A mix of contempt and derision began to dominate that part of the congregation. And the ripple spread, steadily and rapidly, through the entire church. The hushed whispers grew into a restless murmur. Even my uncle and aunt, who had stood in as Olivia's parents, were struck speechless by the screen shown to them by a cousin. My uncle's face turned crimson, his fists clenched in anger. My aunt shook her head over and over, muttering, "It can't be, Olivia would never," as though trying to escape the reality before her. And then, at last, the moment came. In his usual gentle tone, the priest said, "Then, if there is anyone here who has a legitimate objection to the marriage of Madison Brooks and Jacob Foster, please speak now." The church fell silent. Every whisper ceased, and the eyes of 200 guests converged on a single point. I stepped forward slowly and took the microphone from the priest. "Yes, I have an objection." My voice carried through the speakers, reaching every corner of the hushed cathedral. Jacob tried to grab my arm, his face twisted with a mix of panic and confusion. "Madison, this has to be some kind of joke, right? Stop it, everyone's watching." Olivia, pale as a ghost, could barely remain standing, clutching at the hem of her dress. From the cold, stabbing gazes of the guests behind her, she understood that everything had already been exposed. "Has everyone had a chance to look at the card in your hands?" I continued, slowly and clearly. "Yes, what's written there is the unvarnished truth of this wedding and of my life." I turned first to my trembling sister beside me. In my eyes, there was no longer a trace of love or sympathy. "Olivia, you seem to think I lived a life of luxury on Jacob's wealth. While I was working tirelessly to pay your tuition, you were in my fiancé's bed, talking with him about how to divide his fortune. Do you remember a few years ago when I was supposed to go to that internship? The one I staked my career and my life as an architect on? Back then, you lied that you would fail your classes and be held back. And you conned me out of a large sum of money that was anything but cheap. And what were you doing with that money I gave you in place of the world I was forced to close the door on with my own hands? Smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Holding a luxury handbag? You haven't changed at all since that day. The brilliant future you were supposed to seize after graduation, the very foundation of which was your tuition payments, was cut off last night. Congratulations. By your own greed, you've destroyed your future with your own hands." "That's not true," Olivia whispered weakly, turning to our aunt for help. But our aunt could only cover her face and collapse into sobs, unable to even look at her anymore. Next, I turned to Jacob. His face was flushed red with anger and humiliation. "And you, Jacob, you thought of me as a boring woman who only cares about work, didn't you? Fine. That boring woman may not have built a fortune as large as your $40 million. But what I've earned through my own talent and effort is more than enough to stand on my own without depending on anyone. You may have seen my career as nothing more than an accessory. But this strength, no one can take it from me. And it's far too precious to give to an empty man like you. I suppose we won't be needing that prenuptial agreement after all." I pulled the lavish, yet now loathsome hunk of metal from my finger and set it on the altar with a sharp clink. "This wedding is hereby concluded. Thank you all for joining us today for this ridiculous charade." With that, I turned on my heel, the hem of my wedding dress sweeping the aisle as I strode away alone, my head held high. Behind me, Jacob shouted, "Wait, Madison." My uncle roared, "Olivia, what have you done?" And Jacob's father bellowed at his son, "Shame on you." To me, all of it sounded like a fanfare announcing the beginning of my new life. Later, I would hear that the chaos that erupted after I left the church was unimaginable. The consequences of this public unmasking were swift and devastating. The prestigious consulting firm where Olivia had secured a job offer learned of the scandal that very day and immediately rescinded the offer. The stated reason was serious concerns regarding corporate ethics and compliance. Without the tuition support she had depended on, Olivia couldn't even graduate from college. Jacob, too, faced public consequences. The board of directors of his company convened an emergency meeting and determined that his inappropriate conduct had severely damaged the company's reputation, removing him from his position as CEO. Even with $40 million in assets, he had lost the most valuable thing of all, his social credibility. I heard that the relationship between the two of them, bound only by the desire for wealth, quickly crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and their mutual downfall. Olivia lost everything: her wealth, her career, her education, and the trust of her family. The price of her short-sighted greed turned out to be far higher than she had ever imagined. I applied for extended leave from my firm and closed out everything I had in Chicago. Then, with only a one-way ticket in hand, I flew to Hawaii. A place I was once meant to visit for my honeymoon with Jacob, only now I went alone. Betrayal had torn my life's blueprint to shreds. But with the ground cleared, I could now build an entirely new structure, freer, stronger, and far more beautiful. In Hawaii, I bought a small plot of land with an ocean view and began designing a home just for myself. An open, airy house built from local timber, designed to let the wind flow freely through it. Not for anyone else this time. I would design my life again, with my own hands. 2 years passed. My small architectural office in Hawaii gained a reputation through word of mouth, and my days were busy but fulfilling. I actively took on projects with little to no profit motive. In particular, the rebuilding of a small community center in a coastal town devastated by a tsunami several years earlier profoundly changed my heart. The budget was almost non-existent, and the materials we could use were limited. I visited the site every day, speaking with the local elders again and again. What they wanted wasn't a luxurious building, but a warm place where children could run around safely and the elderly could gather in the sunlight. Instead of the high design, eye-catching architecture I had once pursued in Chicago, I poured myself wholly into creating something that would truly embrace the hearts of the people who would use it. When the center was finally complete, filled with children's laughter and the gentle smiles of the elderly, I couldn't stop my tears. It was a joy unlike anything I had ever felt, not even when I had won the biggest competitions in Chicago. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from my aunt. The aunt who had taken the role of parent after our mother and father died, who had doted on Olivia, always demanding that I be the one to sacrifice. It was her first apology to me. In shaky handwriting, she expressed deep regret for spoiling Olivia and unfairly burdening me with sacrifices. She also wrote about Olivia's recent life. After dropping out of college, Olivia had begun working part-time at a small local cafe, learning how to live on her own. Her ties with Jacob had been completely severed, and she now spent her days confronting her mistakes. The letter ended with these words: "I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I only pray from afar that you are happy." After finishing the letter, I looked out at the blue ocean and the community center I had designed. Any anger or resentment had long since been washed away by the waves of Hawaii. I took a postcard and began to write. "I hope you're well. I'm doing well myself. Everyone makes mistakes. I'm cheering for Olivia's new life from afar. Here in Hawaii, I've learned that a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by what they can give." It wasn't forgiveness. It was my final ritual, cutting their chapter out of the story of my life and freeing myself completely. When I dropped that postcard into the mailbox, I truly felt that every last piece of the story had come to an end. In the blueprint of my life, there was no longer any space to sketch the pain of the past. Only hope for the future and limitless possibility remained.